Shush! He's got his finger up in the air. Hey everybody, it's Keith Tanner here from Flyin Miata, and today we're going to be talking about wheels and tires. Specifically, I'm not going to be talking about the perfect wheel and tire combination for your Miata, because honestly that information will be outdated in about 20 minutes. I'm going to be talking about the generalities of choosing wheel and tire combos for your car, what effects they might have on performance, on comfort, on durability, etc., etc. So that's what we're going to be looking at, sort of a higher level view of what's going on. If you do want information on the perfect combination for your setup, should you be running a 235 or a 245 or a 205 or whatever, feel free to reach out to our customer service team, and our team of trained professionals will be happy to help you, give you advice on your specific needs. So if you do enjoy this kind of, before we get into it, if you do enjoy this kind of content, make sure to subscribe to our channel, hit the like button. That helps our channel, it helps bring more people in. It tells you when we're doing live videos like this, or when we've just released new ones like instructional videos. Everybody wins. If you do have questions during this video, please do throw them in the comments. We will do our best to answer them live if you put them in during the live broadcast. If you put them in the future, we do read all of the comments that are put on our YouTube videos, and we will answer them if we can, even if it's just to tell you to go talk to our customer service folks about your very specific needs. I'm going to be talking about, well, wheels and tires. I mean, it's something we have to buy tires. We love buying wheels. We want to make sure that we get the right combination of wheel and tire for our car, because it can make a big difference to how the car performs and how the car behaves on the street. I mean, for racers, tires are the easiest way to buy time for your car. Put a set of really sticky tires in the right size in your car, and you will pick up time easier than just about anything else you can do to the car. On the street, the wrong tire can lead to unpredictable handling. It can lead to discomfort. It can lead to ride quality problems. It can lead to expensive damaged wheels. All sorts of downsides to the wrong wheel tire. So you do want to make sure you're doing the right thing. And again, there's obviously some humor going on in the comments over here. There's a lot of giggling in the peanut gallery. If you do have questions, again, put them in the comments, and Mike and team over here will let me know what they are. So, where should we start? Let's start with general nomenclature. This is a wheel. Some people call it a rim. Technically, a rim is part of the wheel, but it's a wheel. The three main dimensions that we're interested in a wheel, and we're going to be talking about two of them today, is the diameter, it's pretty clear, and the width. So the width is the one we're going to be talking the most about today. There's also the offset, which is the distance from the mounting plane to the center, which is basically how far does it stick out of your car. We have talked about wheel offsets in a video in the past, so I'm not going to get too deep into it, and it's not really part of what I'm talking about today. I'm also going to be talking about the width of the wheel and its relationship to the width of the tire. On the tire, tires have quite a, well, here, I'll use this one over here, Travis. Tires have quite a complicated sizing. Where the heck is it on this car? They're always hard to find. Complicated sizing terminology. This is a 225, 45, 15. 225 is the width of the carcass in millimeters. This one's dirty. 45 is the height of the sidewall as a percentage of the width of the carcass in millimeters. And then 15 is the size of the hole in the middle that you put the wheel into. So we have millimeters, a ratio, and inches. Thank you for that, tire industry. Where that came from, I don't know. But one of the important things to know about that is 225, I mean, that is roughly the width of the tire. But that 45 changes depending on, the size of the sidewall changes depending on the width of the tire. So you can't just look at something with, say, a 45 ratio sidewall and say, oh, it's a skinny sidewall or a tall sidewall, because, I mean, sometimes it's a percentage of a very wide wheel. You know, this is a 245 right here. So that sidewall is probably 40%. It's probably 225, yeah, 245. It's 40% of the 245. If this was a 225, the sidewall ratio would have to be higher to have the same diameter, the same sidewall height. It can get a little confusing. Generally speaking, what you're interested in is keeping the same overall diameter of your tire, in which case, as you go wider in the carcass, you're going to have to go with a shorter profile, a smaller percentage. If you're not sure what all these numbers are, you can go to a site like Tire Rack, and if you look at the specifications of the tire, it'll tell you the overall diameter, and that's really what you're trying to match when you're looking for different size tires for your car. You don't want to go too much bigger than stock because you can get into rubbing problems. It can affect your gearing. It raises your center of gravity. You don't want to go too much smaller because you're going to shorten your gearing. Some guys will do this for autocross, for example. And you also have to watch out for the tire size, or the wheel size inside, to make sure you don't foul your brakes. There's so much to keep in mind. So, a lot to know. But I'm mostly going to be talking about carcass width today. Do you have any questions that we should address yet, Mike?
No, why don't you keep going a little bit?
Okay. Now, something else about the sidewall of tires is these things are not just balloons. I mean, they're inflated. They rely on air pressure to keep themselves in shape. But come on over here and have a look at these ones again here, Travis. I do have a tire from a Suburban here, but it was just handy. And it illustrates something very well in that this has a very soft sidewall. I mean, look at that thing flopping around. Obviously, there's quite a bit of it as well, because it's a Suburban, why not? But, I mean, this is a tire that is designed to flex as much as possible, and that's because that absorbs a lot of little bumps, a lot of harshness gets taken out of the ride by allowing the sidewall to flex. A race tire like this one, obviously it's a much smaller tire, but this is a much, much stiffer sidewall. It's very difficult to flex. If you've ever mounted tires, you know this, because this kind of tire is a real pain in the butt to mount because they are so stiff. And that is because the tread of the tire, the part that's actually touching the ground, is what's transmitting all of the power from your car, all the cornering forces, through to your car itself. So there's a couple of 1,000 pounds pushing sideways on this traction surface, and if the sidewall's flexible, the whole tire will sort of shift with it. I don't know if I can illustrate it on this, but you kind of, no, I can't. It would be fun to have a big squishy tire here to show that off, but I can't. But basically, as you're cornering, as this thing is being ripped across the surface of the tarmac, the sidewall flex is what keeps it attached to your car. So if the sidewall is soft, you end up with some mush. You turn the wheel, and all of a sudden the cornering forces start building up on the surface of the tire, the sidewall flexes, and then once it reaches its static point where it's fully flexed, that's when you'll start to turn. So you can imagine that if the sidewall's too soft, you're going to get some mush in the steering. So racers, autocrossers, people who are looking for maximum performance, maximum response, will go for as stiff a sidewall as they can get because it's a very, very quick turn-in. And it's also a little more, not necessarily forgiving, but a little more consistent, predictable at full, when you're cornering hard and you've got all of the load going through the tire, there's a little less squish in there. There's just less rubber in the whole system. Now, of course, on the street, if your sidewall is stiff, you're going to find that a lot of small harshness is going to come through, a lot of small imperfections, sharp edges on things. Expansion joints, you'll feel those a lot more because the tire's not doing anything to absorb them. It's just passing it straight through, which is what it's trying to do, but it can make things uncomfortable when you're driving around, and possibly even a little twitchy too, depending on how it affects things like tram lining. So you do have to be aware of sidewall stiffness when you are selecting a tire. In terms of the effect it can have on the ride, I once had a set of 17-inch wheels on an NA Miata. I know, what can I say? 17-inch wheels on an NA Miata, and I had a set of 14-inch wheels for that same car with my track tires on it. The track tires, or the performance tires I was running, were the old Falcon Zenith RT215, which was a revelation in the autocross community when it showed up, partly because they were $40 each, but also because they had sidewalls that were basically made of concrete. They never flexed at all. So it was great for autocross. It turned in like crazy, fantastic steering response. But on the street, those 17s, despite having an 1.5 inch less sidewall, were more comfortable to drive around on because they had they weren't an all-season tire, but they're like a 300 tread wear tire that allowed a little bit of flex in the sidewall compared to those Zeniths, which are just basically made of solid steel. And despite the fact that lots of sidewall, it just wasn't comfortable because it was such a stiff sidewall. Anything over there yet, Mike?
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll get off into the weeds in a hurry, so if you want
Try to keep us out of the weeds, Mike.
Mostly it's starting to get into specific questions, but could you maybe cover a generic, like, if you want to aim more towards comfort, if you wanted to see, like, certain sidewall or width or treadwear combinations versus more track-oriented stuff, and kind of give some examples?
Okay, so the the question what people are looking for is, as you might expect, very specific questions. You know, what's the best choice for, here's what I'm doing. So I'm going to try to cover some of that as I go in terms of more generic stuff. And the next thing I'm going to talk about is actually wheel tire sizing and the relationship between the two, because that actually has a big effect and something a lot of people don't necessarily think of, or they don't realize the effects of what they're doing. So this is a 225 45/15 tire on a 9-inch wheel. If you're running an NA or NB on the track, it's quite possible you are running this size setup. Now, you'll notice, yeah, this is specifically, it's a Toyo Proxy RR, maybe not the hottest tire of the moment, but whatever, it's a good, I call it 80% Hoosier. Considerably less expensive than a Hoosier, but sort of like a big grown-up RA1, which is a tire I used to love. Very old school, but anyway, friendly thing for what it is. But more importantly, look at how it fits on the tire. Here's the actual carcass here, and you can see how the sidewall is pulled out a little bit. It's actually slightly stretched. You have to look at it pretty much straight onto this, but you can see if I lay this down, the first thing to hit the ground is actually going to be the wheel. And that's because of the 9-inch wheel and the 225 tire. Now, if we come back here, let's go for a little walk, Travis. This is a street setup. This particular setup, it's a much narrower tire. It's a 205, and it's on a 7-inch wheel. But you can see how the sidewall is bulging out. This does also have a rim protector, this little strip of rubber that sort of protects the wheel. But you can see how the tire is by far the thing that sticks out the most. There's a bit of a bulge to it. And that's something you're going to want a little bit more of in a street bias setup because it allows that flex. You've got that by stretching that sidewall, you're effectively making it stiffer. Great for track guys, more support for the tire when you're running hard on the track. Get better response, you know, even if you've got something with those rock hard sidewalls, putting that little bit of stretch on there will make it more responsive, effectively a stiffer sidewall, but for the street, being able to have that little bit of bulge in there does make things more comfortable. This one here, we'll go around this side, Travis. You can't see it as well. This is a 225, same size as that one on the table, on an 8-inch, and you can see it. There is a sidewall bulge on this as well. If I put this down, it very clearly will land on the rubber and not on the aluminum. So there's a little bit of bulge. So this is something that we will set up for more of a street car because it's got that flexibility. When I ran the Targa Newfoundland in 2011 in the V8 Miata, this is the tire size combo we ran, was an 8-inch wheel inside with a 225 on it. And the reason was because we knew we were going to be running on rough roads, the nature of rally racing in Newfoundland. And so we wanted to make sure that we had that extra little bit of flex to absorb the surface, even at the expense of a little bit of steering response, which was a trade-off we were willing to make. And I can do that same example on several other cars here, but those are the ones that are most obvious. So matching your wheel size, your tire size to your wheel width can have a really big effect on the ride quality. Mike, you have your hand up.
Yeah, in a similar vein, could you talk about maybe going down a wheel size, like from 15s to 14s?
Okay,
15s,
I'll talk plus one and minus one in a moment. As a general rule of thumb, if you match the tire width in millimeters to the wheel width in inches, that's what we basically have here. You'll end up with a good track setup for the street. Go an inch narrower on the wheel. That's my very rough rule of thumb. And it depends on what wheels are available for the car. You can't always find 10-inch wide wheels to suit whatever tire you've got on there. But that is my general rule of thumb. You know, match the 225 to the 9-inch width, and then go an inch narrower for street use. On my own particular track car, I do that same thing. The Targa Miata you've seen in the background before. When it's being driven on the street, I run a slightly wider tire on a 9-inch wheel. It runs a 245, 40, 17, 15. And then on the track, it runs the 225, 45 like we see here. Same overall diameter. There's that percentage of the sidewall again. But the extra width on the extra bulge on the street just makes it that much more comfortable, a little more forgiving. So one of the questions that Mike had was about plus and minus sizing. Basically, what if you go bigger in the tire? What if you go smaller in the wheel? Again, I try to keep the exterior diameter as close as possible because there's a bunch of stuff in the suspension that can be problematic if you go too big or too small. Autocrossers have always been tempted to go smaller because it lowers the center of gravity, lowers the gearing. Autocrossers run in a very specific range of environments, really, so it works for them. For street cars, it can be a little bit more of a problem because that ground clearance problem, or ground clearance loss, not necessarily a plus, but for autocross, that's a great idea. And it is a way to get some weight out of the system. I'll get to weight in a moment. The one thing you got to watch if you go with a smaller diameter wheel is that you have enough room for whatever your brake system is inside the wheel. You've got to have room without rubbing, obviously, in here, and that's the shape of the back of the spokes as well as the overall diameter of the wheel. For example, you can put 15s like the ones on those cars. You know, these Flyin Miata Kojeki 15s will actually fit an ND. The 15x9 will fit an ND even with the Brembo brakes. Other brands of wheel will not necessarily fit. So you're going to want to check with your wheel manufacturer on that one. Tire Rack will not necessarily tell you to downsize unless it's a very specific combo setup. But it can be possible to run with a smaller diameter wheel. That means you either are running a smaller diameter tire, which is what the autocross guys are trying to do. They're trying to get shorter gearing, lower center of gravity, or they just want more sidewall. You want a little more comfort at the expense of more squish. That is one way to do it. It's not a super common way to do it, but it is a way to do it. You can also go the other way, of course. You can go larger in diameter of the wheel, which looks great. We all love doing that. I mean, that car came from the factory with 14s on it. Now it's running on 15s. Looks fantastic on 15s. There's also much better tire availability on a 15, which is why you see so many 15s on the NAs and the MBs. On the NCs and the NDs, people tend to stick more or less with stock tire sizes and 16s and 17s because there's nothing to be gained by going bigger, just a lot more weight, and 17 is big enough for what we're trying to do with the overall tire diameter that we're working with. So I'll go back here and we'll talk about weight. I did an entire video on unsprung and rotating mass. And that's because this thing is hanging off the end of your suspension. This is the thing that has to move in order to allow you to hit bumps and, you know, keep your rubber on the road. So the less mass you have in your wheel tire combination, the better. There's not really a downside to running a very light wheel tire combo as long as it's strong enough. There have been instances where manufacturers have maybe gone a little too far on weight savings and they've had trouble with the durability of their wheels. Track wheels do eventually wear out, but you don't want them to wear out in a season. So you want to make sure that your wheel, whatever it is that's light, is strong enough for your use. But other than the strength aspect and potentially the cost aspect, there's really no downside to it. So the cost aspect, this guy here is running our Tobu wheels, which are forged, beautiful lightweight wheel, very strong, lifetime warranty, including track use on these things. So they're a fantastic wheel, but they are an expensive wheel. We understand that. That's why we offer the Kojeki as well, or Kogeki. I can never remember which way it is.
GIF.
Yeah, exactly. GIF versus GIF, whatever. So it is possible to solve the strength versus weight question by throwing money at the problem, which is what we're looking at here. Or you can go with something that's, you know, it's got enough mass to do what it needs to do, but it's still nice and strong. You don't want to get yourself a set of heavy wheels just because they look cool, because it will have an effect on the way your car rides and handles, and really there's downsides all around. There's an entire video we did on that one. We will put it in the description so you can link to it later. Mike, do we have any questions? A lot of giggling in the corner over here.
People correcting your G pronunciation.
Okay.
Are you going to talk about square versus staggered setups at all?
Oh, the question is square versus staggered setups. So what that refers to is running wider wheels on the back. I mean, technically the wider wheels on the front as well if you're a Honda owner, but we are not Hondas, so we would put the wide wheels on the back because that's the sort of people we are.
Or even wider tires on the same wheels.
Wider tires on the same wheels, yes. The Red Pig race car, the Mercedes 560 SEL race car, a great big thing from the 73 or something like that, ran the same size wheel on both ends, but they actually ran a larger diameter tire on the back for some reason. Yeah, interesting setup. So basically, my general feeling on that one is a Miata has very equal front to rear weight distribution. It's not necessarily exactly 50-50, but it's very close. And by putting fat tires on the back and not on the front, you're handicapping its handling somewhat. You're basically downgrading its front grip compared to the rear. I would rather see you get traction out of something like a better differential or better tires. I like to keep them square all the way around because it gives you better handling overall. You know, we want the cars to turn, we want them to stop. The front wheels are doing the bulk of the work when turning and stopping is involved. So I don't like to undersize the front wheels relative to the rear. It certainly has been done. Some of the V8 guys will sometimes do it because it looks great to have the great big meats in the back. I don't think it's completely necessary, so there's an opinion for you, but it is something you can do if you're looking for a specific look. Technically, I don't think there's a good reason for it on Miatas, given their weight distribution. I mean, 911s have all of their weight on the back, and so they have enormous tires in the back. The fronts are just there to get into the corner, and then the backs take over for everything else. So yes, they're extremely staggered. The BMW E39 M5 runs fat tires on the back, skinnier tires, I mean skinny, on the front. And the hot thing to do for those is to replace the 245s in the front with 275s, get the rear wheels that are 9.5 inches wide, put them on the front, and square the whole thing up because it makes them handle better. So I generally don't like to do the square thing. Let's see what else we have going on in here. Yes. Another thing you got to watch out for when you're buying tires, and this is just tires in general, is you are, for street cars, not so much track tires, because track tires, what's important is how well does it stick, how long does it last, how much does it cost? Those are the three questions for track tires. You know, Lemon guys are interested in how long do they last because they're trying to do enduros, so they have a specific set of tires they like. Track day guys, you're trying to win a track day, will go to a specific tire. People are trying to win actual timed races, will go to the stickiest tire they are allowed to run in the rules. Yeah, that's basically what you're looking for in track tires. For street tires, you've got a different set of parameters that you're looking for. You've got that sidewall flexibility, the sidewall compliance is one of the things. You're also worried about noise, and you're also worried about wet traction. A tire like this will grip on a wet surface, but as soon as you hit standing water, you're going for a ride. You're going to go right across the top of that water, and all of your wheels will be disconnected from the ground for a while until things settle down on the other side, and it might be exciting when you come out the other side. So not a great street tire, this one, because of that. It still will stick. Like I said, wet asphalt is a very different matter than standing water. So it'll stick as long as it's drizzling, but if it's standing water, that's when, you know, when F1 goes to the full wets to evacuate as much rain as possible. This is more of an intermediate. So here, I'll get both these on the same side, Travis, don't worry about it. Well, there's just tires everywhere. There's a couple of street tires, slightly different sizes, but you can see a very big difference in the tread. This thing is going to be noisy. It's not going to be as good on standing water because it doesn't have a lot of ways to evacuate the water. I mean, these will help a little bit, but there's no way for water to get from the center groove out. It's got very high surface, what they call this, the land-sea ratio, I think it is. It's got very few grooves relative to the size of its tread blocks, big chunky tread blocks. So this one is likely to be noisier, and it will not grip as well in very wet conditions because it can't evacuate the water in the same way. And this is a performance street tire, as you can imagine. This is the Bridgestone RE71, which is a nice sticky tire. Not available anymore. I pulled it out of the pile out back. This one was destroyed by one of our V8 cars and a journalist, but yeah, you get that idea. This is more of an all-season, not all-season, an all-round tire. This is the Yokohama Advanti Fleva, whatever it is they call it. It's a 300 treadwear, good street tire. It's one we use on a lot of our street cars for driving around. It's a little bit quieter because it does have ways for the air to get out. It doesn't have the big slabby tread on it, and it will do better in standing water conditions. So this one looks great. It looks fantastic to roll up the Cars and Coffee rocking something like this, but this is the one you're probably going to want if you want to jump in the car and drive cross country. Your call. Any questions, Mike?
Yeah. How about comparing cars that are like extra light or extra heavy and why that might change your tire choice?
So cars that are extra light and extra heavy versus how that will affect your tire choice. Now, this is a Miata channel, so I'm going to assume that we're talking about extra light Miatas versus extra heavy Miatas. So we're talking about maybe a 500-pound range at most. And honestly, I don't think it's enough to really affect your tire choice that much. You are going to burn through tires faster on a heavier car because they're having to work harder to get you the same performance, basically. And there's just a lot more mass pushing them down into the ground, a lot more force pushing them into the ground. Generally speaking, a lighter car can get away with a slightly softer sidewall. You know, the sidewall stiffness is not as critical because you're not putting the same amount of load into it when you ask it to, you know, brake and turn at the same time and really smear that contact patch across the asphalt. Overall weight becomes more important as the vehicle weight goes down, but again, we're not talking about an enormous range there, so again, always go for the lightest one you can. I still like to put as much tire as possible on a car if I'm looking for pure performance. Now, one question we did get is, I will actually read this out because it was a pretty good question. Where'd it go? The designers of the Miata are in multiple videos stating that part of the Miata design philosophy was to ensure it didn't have too much grip. Now, why might that be a good thing? Now, that is purely a street performance concept, really, because track performance, you can't have too much grip because if you don't, the other guy who has too much grip is going to be faster than you. So for street use, you don't really want to just staple the car to the ground. We talked a couple of weeks ago about how not to ruin your Miata, and one of the things I talked about in there, if I remember correctly, was talking about the grip level you run. Running a lower grip setup, a responsive lower grip setup, can be a lot of fun on the street because it allows you to play with the edge of traction a little bit more. You're at a more sane speed, for example. If you're drifting around through a roundabout, and drifting, I mean a four-wheel slip, not the full-on Dukes of Hazzard kind of thing. You can do it at a more sane speed. You can play with the car at a speed that is not going to put life and property at risk, which, I mean, you put a set of these on a tire and go screaming around roundabouts, you've got to really be moving before you can really enjoy the car near the edge of its grip, near the, you can't really play with it too much. It just does exactly what it's told and nothing else. I once had a Golf that was running, I forget what they were, enormous tires, very sticky tires, and it didn't have the horsepower. It had the old 2.0 in it. It didn't have the horsepower to actually get past the traction limit of those tires, so it basically had no handling at all. It just stuck. It was not a very interesting car to drive. I mean, you could go on an on-ramp and just go around and around and around until your face started to hurt, but you never really got to play with it. A Miata with much lesser tires, much less grip, was a lot more fun because you could play with the slip angles and you could actually throttle steer on the corner, that sort of thing. So for street cars, I do like to leave a little bit on the table in terms of overall grip. That's why those Yokohamas I looked at, those 300 tread wear tires, that's one of the tires we use on our Miatas when they're on the street because it allows them to move around a little bit more, allows them to be more playful. And I mean, honestly, that's what the Miata is all about. So here, one of the other questions we have in here, since I'm looking at this. At what point do you consider wheels lightweight, and is it worth spending the extra money for them? I know we had a lot of questions about weights and wheels, and we did talk about, as I mentioned, we did talk about unsprung weight, rotating mass, that sort of thing. There's no line where you say that, okay, a 15-pound wheel is heavy and a 14.9-pound wheel is light. It's all relative. And the wider your wheel, the bigger it is, the heavier it's just going to have to be. There's just more metal in one of these than there is in a 15x7. That's a 17x9, by the way. So it's all relative. You're going to find that there's a lot of performance wheels tend to be about the same weight. The NA and NB guys actually are lucky because of Spec Miata. There's a minimum weight for a wheel in Spec Miata. It's 13 pounds, something like that. And so there's a whole bunch of 15x7s that are they're inexpensive and right at that weight because they're chasing the Spec Miata market. So that's a great place to buy wheels if you want them a little bit skinnier, you want to have some fun. But you'll find that even if you're looking at wider ones, 15x9s, most of the ones in the market are going to be about the same range at the lighter end, and then you're going to see a whole bunch of ranges at the top end. Instead of them being, and I don't remember any weights off the top of my head, but let's just say that, well, we'll use this one for example. In my unsprung weight, I give actual numbers on these, but let's just say this is a 17-pound wheel. I don't recall exactly what it is, but we'll make up a number and call it 17 pounds. There will be a number of wheels in the size that will be about that same weight. It might be a little bit less than that. And then you will find, looking at tire rack, you might find some others that look cool, and they'll be like 23 pounds. Those are the ones you have to watch out for. Stick in the middle of the range, and sort of the common range on good performance good performance wheels, things like tires from Kosei or from Flyin Miata. Those are good ones to look at as sort of a base as what to expect. And then some of the stuff you see on, say, tire rack or some of the other, Rotas, for example, might have some lighter ones. Generally speaking, tend to be on the heavier end of things. The ones with extreme styles tend to be heavy. Stay away from those ones. So just stick with the known brands that will actually publish a wheel weight. If they don't publish a wheel weight, expect it to be high. Do we have any questions over there, Mike?
Oh man.
Oh man, so many questions. Love the response. This new setup that we've got with the chat in the in the videos is great because we get lots of questions.
Maybe talk about aesthetics versus ease of use, like going wider because it looks cool, but what things you may have to do, like rolling fenders and
Okay.
to accommodate that.
So aesthetics, aesthetics versus reality, I think is more or less where Mike is going. What is the effect of going super wide? And that actually, I will, rewind back to where I was talking about stretching the tire. There is a certain subset that will go for extreme stretching. The stance crowd, in large part. Volkswagen Golfs from 1995 did the same thing in Germany for some reason. Enormous amounts of stretch were popular then. It's worked its way into the Miata stance community. So it depends on where you're asking. You might ask, what size wheel or what size tire should I get for my 15 by 9s? Some people will say, get a 195 because it's got that crazy looking stretch with the sidewalls pulled all the way out. It's not necessarily the performance setup. For one, you may have a really hard time finding a shop to actually mount those tires for you. Because there's a group called the Tire and Rim Association that actually standardizes wheel stuff and tire stuff. And one of the things they do is they actually identify what is the range of wheel that a certain tire size should fit on. Even this 225 and a 9-inch is actually a little beyond their specifications. Some tire shops may refuse to do this, partly because they know what a pain in the butt it is to mount these things like this, but also because technically they could be opening themselves up to liability. If you show up with a 195 and try to get them put on a 9, you will almost definitely get a no. But even if you do, you're going to have the sidewalls stretched to extreme, which is putting stresses on the tires that weren't really intended. So do watch out when you're looking at the sidewall, the stretch that we're looking at here. That general range I was looking about, try to match it to the carcass width. If you go too much more than that, you're going to start getting into adverse effects of stretch. So what might you have to do if you do decide to run, this big boy, this 245, which was mounted on a 17 by 9 like this. I don't think we have any behind us right now. To fit these on an ND requires moving brake lines in the rear. It requires rolling the fenders front and rear very carefully because you can crack those front fenders if you're not careful. It requires moving stuff around, and you've got to have just the right offset in order to fit it. Because if you go with too high an offset, that'll move the wheel in. You're going to rub everything on the inside. Even this will still rub the, I think it's the lower front control arm, will rub a little bit full lock. If you go with too low an offset, will push the wheel outboard. Well, then you have trouble getting the fender over the wheel, which is another area of aesthetic experimentation that is certainly out there. But we're a performance shop, so we're going to focus on the performance. So you do want to make sure that you can fit whatever you're trying to do, you can fit it underneath the body of the car. And that's a good place to reach out to specialists such as Flyin Miata, ask questions about, will this fit underneath here? How much will I have to roll the fender? How much will I have to pull the fender? And we did a video earlier on how to roll and pull fenders to show you the technique on how to do it and to make sure that you are clear. And we know, what sizes will fit and what won't. Say over here on Captain Bob, these, what are they again? 225s on a 15 by 8. If you have the right offset, these will fit without rolling. These will fit without modification. If you move this is a 35 millimeter offset, I believe, on this wheel. If you ran 3 millimeters less, move it out by 1/8 of an inch, it's going to start to rub. I know that from one of my own cars. So you may have to make some modifications to the body to run a lot of tire. And it will depend on the tire as well, because while tire sizes are standardized, there's not a lot of oversight necessarily in terms of how big they really actually are. Some tires, like the BFG Rival, has great big slabs of rubber sticking over the side there, which means that it fits bigger than other tires of that sort. Hoosiers are notorious for being bigger than they're supposed to be. Even those Toyo RRs that we're looking at are a little bit chunky compared to other tires of the same size. Because, trying to look for that every little bit of advantage when you're in competition. That's why they now just use templates. They just check to see, will your tire fit in this hole? We don't care what it says on the sidewall, will it fit in the hole? But for street cars, be aware that if you do start going wide, you may have to start rolling and pulling fenders. And I am not going to, in this video, start telling you exactly what the magic combinations are for where you have to roll, where you don't. It is going to come down to alignment, amongst other things. But yeah, that's definitely an area you want to take into account. Mike, anything else?
You're doing pretty good.
Okay, good.
Oh, maybe alignment and how that might be affected, or
Okay, how will your ideal alignment change with tire choice? I don't think we're going to get into that one today. I did another video on alignment, talking about some of the effects of it and what it does, the various bits and pieces. Some kinds of tires, and again, we're looking more at the competition thing, will work better with more camber, depending on where you're from. Camber, yeah. We're not all from the same place. We have different accents. It's allowed. It's okay. Basically, competition tires generally reward more negative camber than street tires do. You don't tend to wear your tires a lot with camber when you're running on the interstate. If you're running hard on the track and you don't have enough of it, you're going to start wearing the outside of the tire more, to get full heat in properly. Every tire has its own ideal setup, and so you're going to want to adjust the alignment to the tire if you're running on the track. And if you're doing that, you're probably not looking to this video for advice anyway. So one question that we did actually have is, can tires prevent my car from moving because of crosswinds at 75 miles an hour? Very specific right there. But that goes back to the sidewall stiffness, most likely. If your sidewalls are very, very flexible, if you're running an all-season tire, or possibly a winter tire or some sort of soft cruiser or something cheap, and you've got a lot of sidewalls, so you're running around on 14s or 15s, you've got a fair bit of sidewall going on there, you can get some squirm on side winds, and basically that's just the tire patch moving around without really moving the wheel. So because the sidewall is able to flex around so much. So if you do have too soft a sidewall, you can get in that little bit of that wandering. Because of a side load, because of the side winds. Now, if you're wandering because there's ruts in the road, that is where you're more likely to be running fat tires, and it's basically the car is just trying to follow what's going on the pavement, because it's hanging on so tight. But it is basically trying to follow the surface around more, so you can get into tram lining effects, that sort of thing, as you get wider. Unless there's any more really good ones there, Mike, I might call this one. He's reading furiously, or furiously reading, I'm not sure which. He's overheating, I think he's locked up.
Yeah. Let's say that we've covered most of it, and we can answer the one.
Okay. So again, if you do have, as I mentioned at the beginning, if you do have very specific questions about what you want to do with your car, what suspension you're running, what generation it is, what you're trying to do, please do contact our customer service reps directly. That is the best way to do that, to get those answers. We're not as well equipped YouTube comments are not a great place to address that very specific kind of question, because there's a lot of often back and forth. So we prefer to talk to you that way, and that way we have a good record of it in the future if we go back to, here's what we did. Like this kind of content, make sure you subscribe to our channel, like the video, sign up for notifications so you know when a new one's coming. There will be another one next week in the same time. And, well, hey, thanks for joining us for our little talk today. Keith Tanner from Flyin Miata, and we'll talk to you later.